Hello and welcome to another episode of CX Conversations. This is your host Vivek, bringing you CX lessons from CX leaders from around the world. I'm really excited about today's conversation because it is something I have been dealing with for the past few weeks. This episode is dedicated to all CX professionals who are preparing to take the CCXP exam. I'm going to be talking about how to prepare for the CCXP exam and what to expect once you are certified. There is perhaps no better person to be talking about this than our guest today, Michael Bartlett. Mike is known for his incredible work in the book CCXP Exam Preparation, a book where he shares strategies and practice tests for the CCXP exam. A certified customer experience professional himself, Mike claims that to call him customer obsessed would be an understatement, which I believe to be 100% true. In his recent article titled, "Are you a CX professional in name only?" he challenges you to think deeply about how much you truly care about the experience you are delivering as a person. After reading that article, I realized that a person cannot be a successful CX professional if people don't have a good experience with him or her personally. In just over 18 years of work experience, Mike transitioned from software development to user experience management to customer experience management roles. Currently, he's the Director of Experience Innovation at JMARK Business Solutions in Springfield, USA. Mike is also the co-lead of Professional Development Committee at CXPA. One thing you would find common throughout Mike's professional experience is that he loves teaching, also evident in him authoring the CCXP Exam Preparation book. Guess what? Mike also is a dog lover. He spends volunteer time in animal welfare shelters and donates all profits from his book into shelters, fosters, and rescues for dogs. Mike and I connected over LinkedIn when I reached out to him with an invite to CX Conversations. He was very kind and supportive to agree, and I couldn't have been more thankful for this. Mike, delighted to have you on CX Conversations.
Well, thank you so much, Vivek, and it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really curious. How did you decide to write the CCXP Exam Preparation book? What kind of motivated you?
So I guess what happened was it all came from when I took my first exam. I took my first exam a few years ago, and I didn't really study too hard for it, but I went in very confident, believing that I had the materials I needed to pass. And I narrowly, like most people who fail, I narrowly failed. I was within a few points. And I made a promise to myself. I said, if I am able to pass this exam second time around, what I will do is I will write a book that shows other people how to pass it. And then I will, in exchange, make sure that all that money goes to do something useful in the world. And I'd already made that decision in my mind that it would go to help dogs. So what I did was I went through a number of different customer experience books and articles, and I extracted out common patterns that I saw. I'm an INTP Myers-Briggs type, so I'm forever looking for patterns, and I'm obsessed with chess as well. So as I go through my life and I see interesting chess positions, there's a word for them. They're called prioms in Russian, and it just means common patterns that you see over and over again that may have a particular solution. I write those down and put the information and archive it away. My goal one day is to be able to write a very interesting chess book. And likewise, the same thing happened with customer experience as well. I saw these patterns, and so I was able to take a lot of information that was contained in hundreds and hundreds of pages of books and condense that down to some principles. So that meant that I could essentially carry all that knowledge around in my head, but in a very easy way, in this case with 18 principles. And I went in and I passed the exam, and then I said, right, I'm going to stick to my promise. And I had a 4-day weekend. At the time I was working for a school district here in Missouri, so I spent those 4 days. I had my dogs either side of me while I was working on it. and I sat on the floor and I just wrote this book out. And the hardest part was coming up with the test questions because I really wanted to show how they related to the principles. But in essence, that's the story of how the book came to be.
Wonderful. And you got the book down in just 4 days.
Yeah, I think there was probably some additional time afterwards, polishing it up, and trying to struggle with some of those questions. But the core of the 18 principles was written down in those 4 days, and I think maybe half the questions were as well.
Wonderful. That's great, Mike. Now, before someone takes the CCXP exam, what kind of prerequisite criteria one should fulfill to be eligible for the exam?
So the best thing a person should do if they're interested in the CCXP exam, is they need to go over to the official website, which is ccxp.org, and on that website they will find lots of information about what they need in order to fulfill what the CXPA are looking for, to be classed as competent enough to take the exam and experienced enough to take the exam. One thing I recommend doing is there's a website link that gives a list of all the different trainers that are out there, and so you can contact one of those if you need help. Another thing people can do is they can contact me. I had a gentleman recently connect with me over WhatsApp from Saudi Arabia, and he needed some help because he'd been filling in the application form, but he'd been rejected and they needed some additional information. So I was able to provide him some guidance on maybe, in fact, I'll actually give you his specific example. He wasn't really being specific enough in the customer experience strategy area. And I told him that that's what the CXPA need. They really need specific answers so they know you've really done these things. And so I was just telling him, in terms of CX strategy, can you describe a bit about the strategy? Can you describe a bit about, when things changed, how did you pivot on the strategy? What frameworks did you use to help you develop the strategy? Those kind of things. When the CXPA see that, then they can see that you've really done it, that you've really invested some time and effort into it. And that's all they really need. They just want to see that you meet those minimum requirements. So the best thing, rather than me just regurgitating it, the best thing for someone to do is just go over to ccxp.org and have a good look around. And then if they want, they can contact me as well.
Perfect. Thanks for that offer, and that makes so much sense. What about personal traits or self-image of a person? Do you think those things matter when one is considering building a career in CX?
Yeah, they do. The problem that we have in CX at the moment, and we have this in almost every field as well, is there's people that do it because they love it, which is the right reason to do it. And then there's people that do it because they see an opportunity for themselves to make some money, which is the wrong reason to do it. And I'm not trying to lecture anybody because I've made those mistakes in the past. I got into software programming because I loved it. And then I found out when I actually did it for a living, I didn't love it anymore. But then I continued to do it because I made good money from it. And I spent many years miserable because of it. And so the most important thing if someone is interested in CX is that they care about other people and they care about making some kind of a difference. There is a test called the Strengths Finder test. Mm-hmm. And when I joined the school district, they actually had me do it just to see what kind of traits I had. And empathy was my strongest trait, which doesn't surprise me because I think people in CX need very good empathy skills. Maximizer was my second strongest strength. People who are maximizers are people that are obsessed with finding ways to make things better. And I think that's also another good trait to have. And so those two really are things that kind of stick out to me. But I'm not saying people necessarily need to do the Strengths Finder test, but certainly people that really care about others and that really want to see positive differences made for customers and employees alike. If you're passionate about that, then I think CX is probably going to be a very good fit for a person.
That is very interesting. Now, without giving too much away, Mike, could you tell us about what CCXP aspirants should expect in the exam? Like what kind of format does the exam have, the number of questions and the time, etc.?
Yeah, so the time it's a 3-hour exam, which I think is plenty of time. Most people I know complete the exam in half that time, maybe a little more. So time is less of an issue than it used to be, because in the old days the exam was less questions and less time, but the ratio was different. So people had to watch their time management skills. I think if English isn't somebody's first language, then it may become slightly more challenging. But I think that's why they've given the extra time as well, because the exam only comes in one language at the moment. Yeah. So I think that kind of makes up for it. It's a multiple choice format, so there'll be a question with 4 possible answers, and you need to pick which one is the correct answer. There's only ever one of those is the correct answer. There's not situations where it could be 2 or 3. You don't get any questions in there where all of the above is an option either. It's always specifically just one of the 4. And the questions are very tricky. I just had somebody message me on LinkedIn recently, and he said, I used your materials and I passed. And he said, but wow, what a hard exam. And the exam is tricky. The wording of the questions is done in such a way that you really have to read them like 2 or 3 times to know exactly what they're asking for. The harder questions are the ones where there's so much information in the question. I personally, other people may not struggle with this, but I personally have to sift through the noise to try and figure out, okay, what exactly is the question here? Because there's a lot of background stuff going on. What's the actual question? And so when people fail the exam, they tend to be, very, very depressed. And I've got messages from people, other trainers get messages. And the one thing that we always have to be sure to reassure them on is, listen, if you've been approved by the CXPA to take the exam, they already deem you good enough, and they already deem you as a competent CX professional. But what happens is these questions, people just misinterpret them the wrong way. I mean, I've seen really experienced people with a lot more experience than I have also failing the exam and becoming very frustrated. And so when you think about the CCXP, knowledge is only a small part of it, because most people going in probably already have enough knowledge. Yeah. But the issue is like being able to tackle those questions and being able to make sure that you understand what the CXPA are looking for. And also sometimes people would want to debate the answers. I certainly wanted to debate a few answers with them as well. But the thing is, you have to forget what you have to think, because you may have worked in one company and one of the answers might be correct. But then you may have worked in another company 5 years before that, and you would have done things a different way. One of the other answers would be correct. So the important part is to think, what is the CXPA looking for? And get into the mindset of what they're looking for in answers. And so kind of that's what I'm training with my simulator and my book, is trying to understand how to interpret those questions correctly so that you give the answer that they're looking for, not necessarily what may be the best answer, which I know sounds unusual, but if you think about it that way, CX is such a growing field. Things are changing every month. New techniques are coming about. It's best to just not try to get into an argument and say, well, it could be this or this. Just think, what are they looking for?
And I've also taken a few mock tests, and I realized that while there are some questions which could be very confusing, and for me, what helps is to reread the question, and also sometimes using reading through the answers also kind of gives you a sense that no, this doesn't seem right. And I mean, you can eliminate a few options by just understanding the question and connecting it with the answers. Would you have some other tips that people could use during the exam to kind of knock through those tougher ones?
Yeah, I do. I actually wrote, so I have a YouTube channel, which is just called CCXP Exam Simulator. And I did a video. It may be my November video. There's only been a few because I do one a month, and I started in October 2018. So I've not really done too many so far. So I'd advise listeners to just go through and listen to them all. They're very short. They're like maybe 3 to 8 minutes length. but I
Okay.
did one that specializes in an exam strategy. And so what I talk about is different ways to knock out narrow down what the possible answers are. And then when you've done that, how to narrow it down further so that you only end up with one possible answer.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people find that they narrow it down and they can't get past two options. And so then it's like flipping a coin, and that's no strategy. So I've done a video on that. I would recommend they just go watch that, and that will help them a great deal.
What's the name of the YouTube channel once again?
It's called the CCXP Exam Simulator.
Wonderful. So while I highly recommend reading your book for the exam preparation, Michael, what is your recommended approach when preparing for the CCXP exam?
So my recommended approach is firstly, book your exam date, because a lot of people want to hold off on booking the exam date so they can study and they don't feel pressured. I actually think it's good to just book the date so you do feel pressured, and then you really start studying. Otherwise, you can find that you never get around to taking the exam. So yeah, book that date. Then the clock starts ticking and the pressure's on. And then at that point, I say that you give yourself 1 month between when you book your date and when the exam is. So you've got 1 month to study. And in that month, what I recommend doing is to, if you can afford to take a masterclass, they're worth doing. Ian Golding does masterclasses in England and Europe. I don't know too many people that do them in America, but there's webinars and things by people like Lynn Hunsaker from Clear Action. As I mentioned, there's a list of all the different trainers on the CCXP website. So they're very expensive though. That's the only downside of a masterclass. If you don't have that much money and you're on a tight budget, then that's where kind of my stuff comes in, my materials. And what I recommend doing is buying the simulator and buying my prepcast. My prepcast is a series of training modules that I've created. It's 3 hours worth of content, but it covers everything that you could possibly be tested on, even in the current exam and future versions of the exam. And it's much harder than the CCXP test as well. So what will happen is you'll do the prepcast, and then once you've done the prepcast, you'll get 2 mock exams, and you'll take the first mock exam, and then there's an AI component built into the system that will then narrow down your strengths and weaknesses. But it doesn't just narrow them down in the 6 competencies. It goes much deeper than that. And I've subcomposed each of the competencies into smaller areas. So there's actually 36 areas it will look at. And that way, if you're only weak in like 4 or 5 different areas, and those happen to span most of the competencies, rather than telling you to just go study those competencies again, it will say simply just study these small, narrow areas. And it will even give you training resources. So you go read this link and you go read this book, and those will cover those weaknesses. And then what you'll do is you'll take the second mock exam, and then that hopefully will be giving you a predicted score of passing at this point in the exam. And for those people that don't receive a predicted passing score, or they actually fail their CCXP exam, the final recommendation I give to people is just to go back to my book, forget everything else, because at that point, if you're not passing, it's more down to how the questions are landing, not your knowledge. And so I tell people to just, literally get rid of everything else and just focus in on my book and the explanations in my book, and try to understand why the right answers are the right answers and why the wrong answers are the wrong answers. And if people do that, then that normally leads to a pass on their second attempt. So that's kind of my exam strategy end to end that I recommend.
Awesome. Now, my last question is, what comes after the CCXP exam, Mike? What kind of career change or growth should one look for once they become CCXP certified?
So technically, you have to do what are called continuing education units, and you have to build enough of those up in the 2 years after your CCXP exam in order to qualify for renewal of the certification. So if you don't do those, then you lose your certification. So that's a great idea by the CXPA to make sure that people are doing it for the right reasons. And then the question becomes, well, what should you study? So what I did, the things that I did to regain my accreditation, the CXPA puts on lots of webinars, and I find them very useful. They're sponsored webinars by different vendors and partners. And they can cover some very interesting topics, everything from behavioral economics to artificial intelligence to deep dives on NPS and things like that. So you see a topic that interests you, you register for it, and they're 1 hour long, and that will buy you 1 unit. And the great thing about the way that they structure it is you can do 10 of those units. You need 20, I think. You can do 10 of them just from self-education. So you can just watch webinars, watch videos, and so forth. Then the question becomes, well, how do I get the other 10? And then all this information, again, is on the website if they want to go look at it. But the way to get the other 10 is to volunteer, to attend conferences, or to even host your own learning workshops as well. And by contributing to the customer experience body of knowledge and growing the field, you not only further yourself and further other people, but you also gain additional continuing education units towards your CCXP. So those are the things that I recommend. What I'm probably going to do here in the next year is probably build out a package of those things as well. So if somebody does what I did, and I kind of left everything to the last minute, because a lot of people are very busy and they don't necessarily have time to do this. What they can do is they'll be able to come to my website and just buy a package, and it'll just give you 10 hours of content right there. And I'll probably test folks on the content as well, so that way, if the CXPA need confirmation that this training really did occur, I can issue confirmation to them officially. And that way they can they can sleep well knowing that those 10 units are all accounted for. So that's one of the things I thought about doing, is because right now I just train people to pass the exam, but really, that's just a small window of someone's career. And there's so many new and exciting things coming along in the field that, I've often thought about just making videos about them, because I think it would just make people better CX professionals. And if I can do that, then it means that customer experience in general is going to be better out there, and that's just going to help everybody. So it's kind of a win-win thing.
True. For the greater good of humankind, yeah?
I agree, yeah. I mean, it sounds almost silly sometimes, but it's true. And it's funny because, one little thing can make such a huge difference. So this house I was telling you about, we first realized there was a major issue when I had a guy come around to install my internet after we bought it. And he couldn't even get into my crawl space under my house where all the leads run, because it was water was flooding into the crawl space. And so what most people would do, in fact, what I told the guy to do is I said, look, because we just had a really sudden flash flood, and we get a lot of flooding in Missouri. So I said, look, just go home. I'll rebook it with the company, and I'll get you out another day. But this guy was absolutely adamant that, well, I'm not here just to tick a box and say that I showed up and it's unfortunate that I couldn't help you and I'll come back. His metric was, I'm going to make the customer happy. And so he picked up a bucket and he started scooping water out of the crawl space entrance. And then he got gravel and he brought it over, heaps of gravel from the drive, and he started reinforcing the sides of the crawl space. And so, of course, then I joined him, and the two of us are standing there in the mud doing this. And anyway, it got to a point where he was actually able to get in to the crawl space and do his job. And I just couldn't believe it, because most people, they get to a certain point, they're following a script in their role, and they're like, okay, I've done everything I could do. I'm sorry, I can't help you anymore. Or they have a script, and they can't go off script. So at that point, they don't know what to do. But this guy obviously was trained. Don't worry about that stuff. The customer comes first. Do everything you can within reason to help the guy out. And I just couldn't believe it. And we always say, in customer experience, it's one of the principles in my book is that if you want to determine the overall experience, look at the experience that was delivered divided by the expectations, and then you'll be able to figure out what the value was. And so for me, the value was enormous and it left an impression on me. Normally, I only remember the bad experiences because they annoy me so much, but I just couldn't get over how great this guy was and everything he did. And so that you remember that. And then, you kind of, when something like that happens, you walk away from it, and it's almost like you've got a battery inside you, and the battery suddenly is charged a little bit, and it's charged with this positivity. And then
Yes.
you go away, and somehow that ripples on. Maybe you're in a better mood, you're more polite, you're complimentary to people, you're helping people. And likewise, when I worked for a company a few years ago that was very negative because it got taken over by some investment companies, and I would bring the negativity home, and that would be inflicted on my family, and it would be inflicted on people I knew. And so I feel that if people charge up the world with positivity, that ripples out. And if they charge the world with negativity, that ripples out. And sometimes those negative ripples can result in destroying people's lives. There was a documentary that HBO just released recently about Theranos called The Inventor. And I didn't realize this at the time. I followed the story because I was just intrigued by everything that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I was told, I wasn't told, I watched in the documentary that someone ended up committing suicide in the film because they were so worried that they were going to be fired from their job. And I can relate to that stress of being worried and having negative company culture and that. So when I look at customer experience, I don't just look at it from a customer point of view, I look at it from a human point of view. And so I don't say business to business or business to consumer, I say human to human. And how can we just do things in the right way? Because if you stop doing things for the right reasons in the right way, you end up with all these type A personalities literally devouring each other, and you end up with a horrible toxic environment, and that can really, really, destroy people's lives. So I take that stuff very, very seriously, and I think sometimes people don't realize just how much the workplace can influence, people's personal lives and their health. As Simon Sinek said, if you're in the wrong role, sometimes that role is literally killing you.
True, and especially when you're spending like 80% of your day at work or something. At least 80% of your waking hours, right? And it's
That's
amazing.
right. Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that incredible story, Mike. It was an amazing story, and while listening to it, I'm also smiling, and I'm also getting that sense of positivity in me. So definitely, CX is something that enthuses people with positivity and happiness.
Absolutely. No, I agree. That's the right way to go about it. And I would say that if anyone's just doing it for the money, it might be better off just to find something else to do, because the field is growing rapidly, and there's going to be some very, very good people in this field. And it's going to be it's hard to compete with people on something when you don't love it and they do. And so I think those people will kind of get pushed out anyway, and they'll need to find something else to do. But the most important thing is that this industry is filled with people that just love helping others. And I think when that becomes the case, this industry is going to start to gain even more, notoriety and respect from all of the other disciplines out there as well. And I see some really good things on the horizon for customer experience.
Definitely, so do I, and which is so true about CX professionals. People like you helping me out create this amazing podcast. And Michael, thank you so much for spending this time with me. And I really enjoyed talking to you about how to go about the CCXP preparation, given that I'm also doing this preparation right now. And I'm pretty honest that this is going to help a lot of our listeners, and it's going to be a valuable lesson for everyone who listens in. Thank you so much, Mike, for spending the time.
You're welcome. I really enjoyed it. Good luck in your CCXP as well with it.
Thank you. Well, to everyone else listening to this podcast, this is your host Vivek signing off from another episode of CX Conversations. See you next time. Bye.